Good morning, everyone. This is Bernd coming to you once again from the lovely, beautiful region of Cape Cod. Today is Friday, July 3rd, and I have finally discovered another spot that might be at least somewhat useful to recording. However, as you can hear, there is background noise, so I might occasionally have to speak louder than I prefer to so that I am able to be heard. Where I live currently in Hyannis is basically very, very close to the airport, so occasionally I will probably have to pause as planes come roaring by only about, I think, 1,000 feet above me. I am literally that close to the airport, and as you can hear, there is a neighbor doing some sort of work on their property behind me, so occasionally I might have to pause if the sound gets too loud. My apologies. I continue to look for suitable places to broadcast regularly where I can record my videos every day. The libraries are currently still not really operational here, as is the case for other businesses, so I can't go to a study carrel. There's a lot of places that I can't go. The mall, however, is open, so in the future I might end up trying to go to the food court there and broadcast, as it's very difficult to find any place with complete privacy these days. So, I will speak louder than normal to ensure that hopefully you can hear me throughout this recording today. So, as I said, today is Friday, July 3rd. It is the day before our annual Independence Day celebration. And as to be expected, the Cape is very loaded now with people who have traveled here from New Jersey, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and so on. So the traffic here on the Cape is much greater than usual, and you can tell that because it takes a lot longer to get to places. So, what is the purpose of today's episode, you ask? Today, I am doing yet another episode on my top influencers. These are the people who have profoundly impacted who I have become based on the person that they are, perhaps due to their research, perhaps due to the work that they do in the world, perhaps due to their personalities. Any number of things can make someone one of my top influencers. So today, I am going to speak about my third influencer, and as I was thinking about this the other day, I realized that even though I am doing these in a chronological sequence, they're not necessarily to be understood as being truly ranked from most influential to the 10th most influential. At this time, I'm planning to do about 10 of these episodes. That could change if, as time passes, more people come to my mind and I realize that I really should do an episode dedicated to them. But as for now, it is going to be 10 episodes total is my plan right now. But as you know, especially in the world of today, so much is uncertain that I could easily end up doing more. But there will be at least 10 total episodes featuring this sub-series of my top influencers. So, today, and I'm making one little minor change here. Today, I am talking about a child psychiatrist by the name of Lenore Terr, last name spelled Terr. She is a medical doctor who, for at least a part of her professional career, practiced in the state of California. As I recall, she had training through the University of Michigan, and her claim to fame, at least one of her claims to fame as I understand it, is a seminal piece of work that she wrote a number of years ago. I don't remember the exact year that the book was published, but she wrote a book called Too Scared to Cry. And this book was a compilation of the discoveries that she made when she explored the impacts of a horrific event that a group of school children experienced in the town of Chowchilla, California in the late 1970s. I found it a fascinating read. The book is written in a fairly conversational quality. There isn't a lot of heavy academic quantitative analysis that you read in the book. It's written in a way that most anyone, I think, can grasp the basic ideas. So I highly encourage you to look up this book and check it out if you or if friends or family of yours have been impacted by trauma in their childhoods. And basically, I'm going to come out and say that I read this book because I myself was traumatized when I was a kid due to some very horrible things that happened to me that I had really no say in the matter. And in a future episode, I will potentially go into greater detail about that. Now, one final point before I delve into this doctor's background and this book is yes, for those of you who have not watched a lot of episodes, Hercules is back with me today. He was in my episode yesterday when I broadcast from beautiful Nickerson State Park here on Cape Cod, and he was a little miffed because rather than join me, he sat inside my car and held up the parking proof ticket so that I wouldn't have any issues with my car. So rather than be at my side, he sat in my car and watched over my car, and he would much rather be supervising me now and has insisted that he be present for all videos until future notice to ensure that I only make so much of a fool of myself and not too much of a fool of myself. So he's going to be watching very closely from here on my shoulder and whispering encouragement into my ear on occasion. So please welcome him as well. So Dr. Lenore Terr wrote this book a number of years ago, and in the book she describes not only this incident featuring these California school children, but what happened to them, what symptoms, in a sense, they displayed after they were abducted in their school bus in July of 1976. The exact date was July 15th, 1976, and there was one school bus driver and 26 children who were abducted on this July day. And the abduction in itself would have been more than enough to probably traumatize any number of children. That is a scary thing to experience as an adult if someone holds you hostage or abducts you and takes you somewhere that you've never been. It's even more terrifying, I would argue, if you are a child, because fundamentally, a child doesn't have the frame of reference and the life experience to contextualize what they're experiencing as compared to an adult. Now, I just used a somewhat large word. What does contextualize mean? What I mean by contextualize is to be able to interpret, respond to, and in a healthy way move beyond an event, an episode, an unfortunate thing that you might experience in your life that calls upon you to be a mature person and move past something that might be very painful and terrifying and something that might leave you feeling like you need to shut yourself off from the world to protect yourself. So, on July 15th, 1976, 26 school children and their bus driver were abducted by 3 teenagers. And after the abduction occurred, it was further upsetting and compounding of the trauma when the kids were basically driven to a quarry in Livermore, California, where they were forcibly put into a box inside of a quarry in Livermore, California. So, not only were these kids forcibly taken on a ride that they weren't expecting, and that was terrifying, but they were then taken to a quarry in a different town and basically told to comply and be put in a box in the earth. So this is the sort of thing that I think could reasonably create a fear in a child or an adult of closed spaces, right? I think this could be a perfect thing that could happen that could lead someone to become claustrophobic. And you can imagine how difficult it could be to be claustrophobic, right? I personally don't have that fear. If I have a fear or a phobia, it's more of heights than it is of closed spaces. When I go into skyscrapers or tall buildings, in the past I've had employers where I worked in tall buildings and I was able to go right up to a window and look out at the world and see an amazing view. I love the view usually. What I don't like is looking down and seeing how high I am up to get that view. So, if anything, I have a bit of a fear of heights, but thankfully claustrophobia is not one of them. And living with claustrophobia, I would imagine, can be difficult because you might not want to use elevators. You might not like to be in rooms that are of a certain size or smaller, or be in a space filled with people that is a small room. It can be difficult, I would guess, to ride public transportation. Imagine living in New York City, for example, and having to ride the subway to go to work, and you're in a crush of people that has the car completely at capacity. That could be a very difficult thing for claustrophobic people. So, what happened to these kids then? I don't recall exactly from reading the book if any of the kids died. I believe no one died from what I can recall of the book, but I read this book a number of years ago now. In fact, I read this book in the early 2000s when I was living in San Francisco, California, and I had become fascinated with the subject of trauma because I was seeing a therapist of my own to deal with the impacts of the trauma that I had experienced when I was a kid. And I will plan in future episodes to talk more about this topic of trauma and specifically to some degree some of the details of what I experienced. So, these kids were led into a quarry, and as I understand, as I recall, they survived. Like I said, I don't recall any of them dying. Dr. Terr studied these children in the aftermath of this trauma. As I recall, in the book that she wrote, she did not discuss that she treated the children as a practicing psychiatrist. She was more focused on studying the impacts of the trauma on the children's behaviors. Now, before I go further into the symptomology, what she witnessed, I want to step back a moment and talk about the definition of trauma, since that is the focus of this topic and the life's work, in a sense, at least the partial life work of Dr. Lenore Terr. So, trauma has many definitions. If you Google it, you're going to get many, many websites telling you what trauma is defined as. Two that I found this morning that I think are especially accurate are the following. Trauma is, quote, the response to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope, causes feelings of helplessness and or hopelessness, diminishes their sense of self and their ability to feel, my emphasis, feel, the full range of emotions and experiences. So that is one, I think, working definition of trauma that is very good. Secondly, another definition of trauma. Trauma is a, quote, deeply distressing or disturbing experience. So that can include a lot of things then, right? Trauma can include many, many experiences within the category that it represents. So, some examples. Car accidents. There are many, many Americans every year who are involved in car accidents. I've been in car accidents myself. When I was a teenager still living at home, I was in a car accident. I accidentally bumped the rear view portion of a car in front of me as I approached an intersection to make a left turn. Thankfully, it was not a high-speed impact because high-speed impacts can cause serious and sometimes permanent damage to your spine and to other parts of your body. So car accidents are one. There are a number of things that people working in the occupations that I discussed in a recent episode can experience that could be traumatic. Take, for example, roofers. Roofers have a dangerous profession because if they fall from a great height, like a second-story building, while they're roofing, they can end up seriously injuring themselves, breaking their necks, or even dying. So people who are in incapacitating accidents where they're paralyzed, where they become paraplegics or quadriplegics, these individuals could be genuinely traumatized by the accident that leaves them living in that sort of condition. Other examples of trauma may include being in natural disasters. So, floods, fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, destructive hailstorms, contracting diseases that leave you permanently altered in your ability to function. These are all things that can happen to us that we can experience as a trauma. So, besides the fact that I wanted to introduce the subject of trauma in relation to Dr. Terr's work, another reason that I wanted to introduce this topic to you, my loyal viewers, is because trauma is an element of much of human life. The longer you live, the more likely it is that you will experience something truly upsetting or deeply disturbing. So, the longer you live, the more likely it is that learning about trauma will be relevant to your life journey, because the longer you live, the more likely you are to experience some form of trauma in your life. Some other final examples. I guess Hercules is tired of being that close, so he's going to sit down here now and supervise there. Some other macro events, macro incidents that can be highly traumatizing, not just to you, but to entire populations, include wars, major geopolitical conflicts, pandemics, like what we're going through right now, genocide, where an entire people are killed, mistreated, abused, sent to a new place to live. These mass scale events can be very serious, deeply traumatizing events that change the course of a people's history. In my own heritage, in my own ancestral heritage, I have experienced vicariously through my ancestors stories of trauma, at the very least. My two grandfathers, my dad's father and my mother's father, fought on opposite sides in the World War II conflict, the war that is well known, obviously, as one of the most historic and destructive conflicts in modern human history. Anyone who has read even a survey of European history and American history knows that World War II was a massive conflict that involved many, many nation states and ultimately led to the deaths of many people and the destruction of entire cities within Germany and Japan. So, as I said, my two grandfathers fought on opposite sides of the war. My German grandfather was required, as I have been led to understand, to go to the Russian front and fight for the Nazis in Russia. Sadly, I do not know a lot of the details of his wartime experience, as when he was still alive, I did not ask him such questions. At the time of his death, I had learned about 4 years of German, so I was able to be conversational, to be conversant with my grandfather in his native language of German. And one of the things that I do vividly still recall these years later was him speaking about how after the war, basically one of the things he said was that everything was destroyed Alles war kaputt, destroyed. I'm struggling for a better word than kaputt. That's something you would use more to describe when your car conks out on you. So, in his native German, he told me some survey level information about what Germany was like after the war. After the war, it was basically a land filled with rubble in many major cities because the Allies had bombed the population as part of the campaign to end the war. Cities like Dresden are especially well known for the fact that they were virtually obliterated during World War II. So, there is a lot of traumatic experience in my own ancestral heritage. And like I said, because the longer you live, the more likely you are to experience trauma, I personally would argue, based on my study of trauma, to understand it better, I think there is a vast undercounting of the number of people who are alive today, as well as the number of people throughout human history who have been traumatized. Now, trauma as a meaningful principle used in diagnoses of mental illness is not a category, it's not a way of understanding mental health that was really understood as such until very recently within the mental health community. Early on, trauma was understood in some sense as the shell shock that people who had gone off to war experienced and then were impacted by for many years after their wartime service. And even if people didn't experience conflict, even if they didn't actually see their fellow soldiers discharging their weapons, shooting people, murdering people, moving to occupy cities in a foreign land, even if they didn't witness these things happening, even if they didn't partake in it, the fact that they were part of that history, I would argue, could be traumatizing. Obviously, most likely not to the degree that seeing actual conflict, actual action, obviously not to that degree necessarily would that be the case. So my point is that trauma is a very omnipresent part of human experience. We can be traumatized from an early age, like the Chowchilla school children were. And that trauma, when it comes at an early age, can be very scarring and very much influence the future course of our lives, especially if we don't seek resolution and treatment in whatever form we might choose of those scars, of those traumatic wounds. So, Dr. Terr did a great thing, I would say, by writing this book. At the time, I was a young man living in California, and this book changed my life. Reading it changed the way I understood trauma. It changed the way I understood how it affected me and my development. And it changed my sense of what the world was. It, in a sense, shattered any sort of monochromatic understanding I had of history, like a black and white, very discrete sequence of events that are what we call history, and in a sense made the world a colorful, more vivid reality and understanding in my mind about how trauma has existed throughout human history and how it has imprinted itself on individuals and entire nations, and how it has been, in a sense, a central piece of human history. When you think back through all of the time of human history, all the conflicts, all the wars, those are stories of trauma. Those are stories of people being deeply wounded, injured, murdered, mistreated for whatever cause the war was about at that time. So I'm going to close the episode now by talking about the symptomology. And I'm not going to speak long because I don't want my videos to get too long as I continue to learn how to create content and provide it to you on my channel. So the one finding that Dr. Terr had that always has stayed with me for all of my life, for all the years since I read her book, is that children who were traumatized, the children that she studied in this incident, these children from Chowchilla who were abducted in their school bus, she noticed that the children tended to reenact their trauma in their play life, in their playtime. I still remember vividly one particular piece of content in her book in which she talked about, quote, burying Barbie. And what she meant by that was watching one of the kids who had been abducted reenact the sense of, I think, as I understand it, the sense of being boxed in, the sense of being enclosed, the sense of being trapped, the sense of being overwhelmed, reenacting an experience of trauma of being put in a quarry by burying her Barbie doll in sand. And so this girl, as I recall it was a girl, this child reenacted the trauma of being abducted in a school bus, driven away to another town, and then being forced to go into the earth, into a quarry. She reenacted her trauma in her playtime by taking a doll and making it go through, in a metaphorical way, what she went through. She put the doll, put her Barbie into the earth, into sand, like she had been, like she had experienced. And so the conclusion that you can draw from this is that one way to screen for trauma, to understand if someone has been traumatized and what the nature of the actual trauma was, is in children, for example, to see if they are reenacting or engaging in some sort of play in which the same theme appears over and over and over and over again. So for any viewers that I have who have children who reenact certain things over and over and over again, that you could interpret as concerning or disturbing or unusual, that could indicate something deeper. I don't say does, because we should not be so careless as to think that in every case that we see something, that it means something else. To do that, to automatically jump to conclusions in our mind that because this happened, or this person is doing this, that it means that they think this, or that they always believe in doing this, or that something like this happened to them when they were a child or years ago, even as adults, that's not necessarily what should be understood. That's not what the takeaway is here. The takeaway is that this can be a meaningful indicator of something that the child or an adult has experienced some time ago. And so I'm not going to hypothesize here and give you discrete examples of what that could mean. I think you can probably think about that and come up with your own ideas. But let's just say, as one example, actually, if you have a young boy, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old boy, and he likes to play with cars, little model cars that are like this big, and he likes to crash them into each other. Does that mean that at some point in his history as a child that he was involved in a head-on collision in a car? No. It doesn't necessarily mean that. When I was a kid, I would imagine doing things that involved tanks and cars. Not a lot, not as much as a lot of other boys, but I saw that kind of play. I was exposed to that. I got what it was. So just because little boys are doing that, and just because little girls might dress up their dolls or undress their dolls, that doesn't mean that there's been a sexual trauma. And for boys, that doesn't necessarily mean if they're bumping cars together that they want to go destroy things or they were in a catastrophic accident. That's not necessarily how it works. But the seminal finding that has always stayed with me, like I said, is that trauma in children, among other things, can manifest as a reenactment in their playtime. That has always stayed with me. as a profound finding of Dr. Lenore Terr's research into childhood trauma. So, I invite you to look up this story. If you just Google Chowchilla, California kidnapping, you'll find plenty of resources. As I saw today, as I prepared, there is even a documentary from what I saw about this incident. So, I'm going to close today by thanking all of my viewers and thanking you for joining me in Hercules as I have brought to you episode 9, featuring my third influencer, Dr. Lenore Terr, MD, child psychiatrist, whose profound work in childhood trauma crossed the path of my life and radically changed my understanding of who I was, what had impacted me, and what can be done when we do experience trauma in our lives. So, I thank you all for watching this today. I am going to be recording another episode right after that, so you're going to have 2 episodes, 2 brand new episodes today. And I look forward to then talking to you folks next week. I will not be recording tomorrow on the 4th of July, and I will not be recording on Sunday, July 5th. I will be back on Monday, July 6th with an all-new episode. So thank you. Cheers to all of you. Be safe tomorrow. Please wear your masks. I know it's tiresome some days. I get hot when I wear my mask because it's warm now. You wear a mask all day and you feel the warm, moist air when you exhale right next to your skin. It can be pretty tiresome to deal with. But it is a very small measure to ensure, more than it would otherwise, that you're going to stay safe and that you're going to keep all the people around you safe. So please, wear your mask when you're out in public. Respect the needs of yourself and respect the needs of the other people you come into contact with, because choice is a profound thing, and I will talk about that as well in a future episode. So, cheers, everyone. Hercules is very pleased with me today. Thank you, Hercules, and I will see you folks soon. Bye-bye.